and the nose of my snowboard hit and my shoulder hit, and I heard a loud pop. And I automatically thought, oh, shit, I probably snapped a rib or whatnot. And I was just laid on my stomach grunting, like death grunts, like, like couldn't breathe. So yeah, I really thought I just snapped a rib because it was just so much pain. And my brother and his friends stopped. They said, "Can you get up?" I said, "No." So they went down to try to go get some help. And then I was just laying face down in the snow, just doing this grunting because I was just in so much pain. And I watched all these parents and kids just pass by me. And it was these two punk ass snowboarders that were smoking cigarettes that actually stopped to help me. Like nobody else stopped. And they put a snowboard in front of me so nobody would run into me. Because I was like, going around the turn, nobody's going to see you come out and boom, hit me. So thankfully they helped. My brother came back and said, nobody's coming. And I was like, what do you mean nobody's coming? He's like, I don't know. I told the lifty, and, he just kind of shrugged it off. And so those kids got pissed and they said, we're going to go down and get somebody. So thankfully, after they left, a random ski patroller stopped by and said, hey, are you okay? I said, no, like I have a lot of pain. I can't move. And so he tried to take my vitals, and, it's like, all right, we need to get you down. So luckily they got a toboggan. They got me down there. I was down in the first aid, and they're checking all my vitals and everything, checking my ribs out. And they said, is your complexion usually this pale? Do you have a low pulse usually? I don't know. I don't think so. And they're like, well, your ribs are fine. We think you have internal injuries. And at that moment, I said, oh shit, I'm going to die tonight. Death became a real thing. And I didn't really grow up very religious, but I started praying. I said, God, I know I've never really had a relationship with you. I don't even know if you're out there, but please, I do not want to die tonight. I'm just too young. So luckily, the first responders medevaced me out. They didn't just take an ambulance. So they got the helicopter, and they medevaced me out, and I got to the hospital, and my uncle was there. He was a first responder for that hospital, luckily, and he was there and reassuring me that I was in good hands, and these people were going to help me. And by that time I got to the hospital, I started to kind of lose consciousness, or my consciousness started to expand. I don't really know how to describe it. I didn't really think about death. I knew it was going on. The nurses and doctors were freaking out, just trying to rip my clothes off and do all the things that they needed to do. And, I could hear one nurse freak out saying I can't get his pulse, his veins in his upper body are collapsing, and they're trying to just hook IVs up to me, but they can't tap into my veins. And I remember they had to tap into my femoral artery, and, my uncle's there. And I had a really interesting insight. I said, this guy's family, but where I'm about to go, I can't take anybody, even though he's so connected to me. I said, this is my journey. So then they ended up doing a sonogram, and they said, Kyle, you have massive internal bleeding. This is probably why you feel so sick and you're in so much pain. We need to figure out where this is coming from. And by that point, it was like my spirit or my consciousness was really encompassing the whole room. And it was like I could feel the anxiety of all the nurses and doctors. And it was like, I guess I describe it like it was like my consciousness hooked into this oceanic feeling. It was like, it's like consciousness is everywhere. It was like I was finally hooked into everything, if that makes sense. It's so hard to try to put into words, but it felt like, there's this consciousness or this energy. It's like an ocean throughout everything. And it was like I was hooked into that, and I could feel and tap into everything. So they brought me over to the CAT scan machine. And at that point, I was really starting to fade away. They kept telling me, I remember they were on the loudspeaker, don't fall asleep, Kyle, don't fall asleep, just trying to keep me awake. At that point, before I got in there, they had me with warming blankets on, and I'm just so cold. So I'm in the CAT scan machine. I can barely breathe because there's all this pressure on my chest. And then, I'm just freezing. It feels like I'm submerged in a tub of ice water because I literally just have no blood flowing through me. And I just remember after the doctor telling me not to fall asleep, it was I described it as this orb of light. I don't really know what it was, but there was something that just kind of came to me and said, don't worry, relax into this. You're going home. And I was like, what? And it was You're going home. You're going back to the stars where we all come from. This is just a transition. Just relax into it. Your physical life's going to cease to exist, but you're going to continue on. You're going to, and I said, I became overwhelmed with like bliss and love. It's like, oh my God, this is what I've been waiting for. This is amazing. And so I really started to like relax into my body and kind of let that process unfold. And then the doctors were just like, don't fall asleep, Kyle, don't fall asleep. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm going home. Like, this is what I've been waiting for, and I accepted it. And there was just something so beautiful and peaceful about it. And so they got me out of there and they said, we need to do emergency surgery ASAP. Like, you rupture your spleen and you have massive internal bleeding. We need to get you in the surgery. So they got me out. They brought me to the ER, or the operating room, and I remember everything up to, they were explaining they were going to give me anesthesia, and that they were going to start counting backwards. And then the last thing I heard was, should we use a straight razor or an electric razor? And then I passed out. And then I woke up as they were wheeling me to the IC, the intensive care unit. I remember shooting up. This happened so quickly. I shot up from the bed as they were wheeling me through the hallway. And I took the biggest breath of air, like, and I shot up, straight up, and I just started shaking and convulsing. And in that split second, I heard, he's awake and he's cold. And then I just passed out, and then woke up in the intensive care unit. And my whole family's around me, and I'm just like, and I guess my memory is still there. I said, hey, is it still New Year's Eve? And they're like, it's only 9:30. I was like, are you serious? Like, I fell at like 7:30 or something like that. So I was still aware of like my time. I wasn't like knocked unconscious or anything where there was like a memory gap. I was like, did the ball drop? Like, no. And so that was just the beginning of something that, very life changing. The psycho-spiritual aspect. The physical trauma too, trying to I have a huge scar on my stomach, and, they had to really do emergency surgery. So, getting back into shape and working with all that. But the psycho-spiritual aspect was probably the most challenging part of all this. It was like, I kind of make it like a metaphor of like, I woke up with a map on my chest, and the map is like how the world works. At 16, it's a lot of information to sort through. And so, I went back to school, and it was tough for me psychologically, just because, I was dealing with these heavy existential like questions of like, what is life? What's death? I don't even know if I'm alive. There was a part of me that thought I was dead still, and I was in some sort of Bardo state, and like, maybe I'm not here. And then, I was on this huge high of like, I'm alive, like, this is awesome. And then once these like thoughts started to become a little bit more concrete, then I started to feel like a pretty heavy depression. And yeah, it was pretty intense just to work through like what that experience was. And, in our culture, we don't really have too much of a framework to work with that. So it's I was left on my own to try to figure it out. And I think that was like the most challenging, because everybody's like, oh, you should be happy. Like, you're alive. And, and on the inside, I'm like, I don't think you understand what the hell just happened. Like, psychologically, and maybe spiritually as well. Like, it was as if I went somewhere and I talked to something or someone, and I came back with like this new way of viewing the world. And I didn't really, the whole like seeing is believing thing. Like, I didn't have that traditional near-death experience where I was like going down a tunnel of light and I saw all this stuff. Like, I just knew. And it was that knowing just freaked me out, because I didn't have any context to put it to. And there's just something so deep in my bones. I was like, this is truth. And like, I'm like, how do I deal with this? So I went back to school, and it was pretty rough. I pretty much kind of stopped doing all my work and told the teachers that this was like all crap. I was like, you guys are just like factory producing kids with this bullshit education. And it was really challenging, just to kind of like, cause I think I just got a whole different glimpse of like what life is all about in a sense. And, yeah.
I can't even begin to imagine what it was like at 15, 16, trying to integrate that experience. And what I find is so fascinating about this is that you didn't have any, as you say, religious context or lens to apply this to help it make sense to you. And, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about their near-death experiences, they said, I was with God, or here you are, a kid with none of that. And yet you're feeling this truth.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what it is, but like it's so immense that it's undeniable.
Yeah.
And then you come back and you have to be here.
Yeah.
I mean, so then you're back in school. It all feels like bullshit. You're trying to, I guess, hang on to some sense of why this reality is important and why you have to keep doing the things that you were doing before. But it's like, you're awake now.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you go with your search? I mean, did you start looking up other people's near-death experiences or seeking out spiritual texts? Like, what did you do to try and make sense of this as you got a little bit older?
Right off the bat, I didn't do that. Like, I think I was just really trying to figure it out on my own. And, I guess I don't know, it really didn't click to try to do a lot of research. I mean, I think I did some here and there, but actually what was the most helpful, and I just found an essay a couple of years ago and I read it. It was so dark. But one of my favorite classes in high school was, I think it was my junior English class, where we focused on existential writers. And I loved it because it was all about life is meaningless. So that, I think, was like my start of like just being like really influenced by like Camus and like some of these other existential writers of like, what is life? What's the meaning of life? And then it probably wasn't until like after I graduated high school that I really started to kind of dig in. From that sophomore year to senior year, I was just, I don't know, I guess in my own process of trying to just be like a teenager, and then getting caught up with like all the different emotions that you go through during adolescence and relationships. And I was really kind of caught up in a relationship all through high school and, the breakup and all that stuff. And so I think I was like more caught up in like social dynamics as most adolescents are. But then like when I would go home, I would, kind of sit in these other feelings. So that journey, yeah, I guess really started after I kind of got out of high school.